I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and we're here with my co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and we are on For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a program where we talk about the environment and ecology. We talk about it in terms of how it affects you, your family, your wealth, your health, your happiness. And we do it, I think, with a little bit of humor every now and then, when we're lucky. And we kind of look at things and we look at angles that a lot of other people and a lot of other stories, a lot of other news outlets don't. And so I know this is normally a sports station, 106.5 The Ticket, that we're very happy to be on. But just for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking a little bit different. We're going to be talking ecology and the environment. But don't worry, right at 9 o'clock, sports will be back with Mick Gonzalez and the Cheap Seats. But today we have kind of an unusual show because normally I'm asking people to call in at 866-240-1065. But this week's show is actually pre-recorded. Rebecca and I are sitting in the studio here on Wednesday, and we are doing the show, although we do have a live guest coming, which I'm looking forward to. His name's Ryan Shannon. He's with the Center for Biological Diversity, and we'll be talking to him in just a few minutes. But the reason that we are pre-recording is because I will be going to Alaska on Thursday. So my family's going, my wife, my son, and I are all going to go up to visit my other son, who is graduating from Alaska University with a degree in outdoor education, a master's in outdoor education. And it's one of those proud moments for a parent. He is actually paying for the whole trip.
Cool.
Yeah, he's buying our plane tickets and he's got the hotel reserved already. And what could I say but okay. So I'm going to be up in Alaska on Sunday, as those of you in Toledo are listening to this. And so I looked ahead at the weather report for Alaska. And it's going to be snowing every day, which you might expect in Anchorage in December.
Fits one stereotypical image of Alaska.
Right. But the average temperature for the coming week is going to be around 30 degrees, which here in Toledo, or even especially in Columbus, you might say, oh, 30, that's cold. Well, the average temperature in Alaska in December is supposed to be about 16 degrees. So 15 degrees warmer than normal is not normal. And this is part of a pattern that we're seeing with global warming, and that is that the poles, the far north and the far south, are heating up much faster and much more severely. They're going temperatures much higher than average than over the rest of the globe. And that also was one of the things that was predicted in the models back in the 80s and the 90s. They warned us that this would happen. And at that time, the global warming deniers were in full force saying, oh, it's just all predictions and guesses, and you don't know what you're talking about. And, you know, here we are 20, 30 years later, and it turns out they were right. So it reminds me also of back in January 2016, the last time all of us went to Anchorage, it was January in 2016. At that time, the average temperature was about 40 for the week that we were there. There was no snow on the ground in January in Anchorage. And so, those of you who are still clinging to this fantasy that global warming isn't happening, I wish I could bring you with me to Anchorage and you could see the difference. You could see what's happening.
There's no denying things have got seriously weird in the world.
Yeah.
In a weather-related way.
It's true. But one thing about humans, though, is we are very influenced by our environment. And in fact, there was a study done where they surveyed people on their opinions on global warming. And the tricky part, because these were psychologists doing it, so this was a tricky thing, is that half the people, they had the people in different temperature rooms when they took the survey.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. No.
Oh.
And it turned out that the temperature of the room they were in influenced the results of the survey by about 20%.
Wow, we're idiots as a species. No wonder. Jeez, oh, Pete.
We're not idiots.
I think we kind of are.
We're just field dependent. That's all. We're just like, oh, it is hot. I guess there is global warming.
Oh.
Yeah, no, but you're right.
Oh, humanity.
It does take slightly higher, reasoning skills to say, okay, it can be hot in this room right now or cold in this room right now, but
we need to do better than that. We really do.
Yeah. Well, that's why we have this show.
Yeah, there we go.
We are doing better.
Yeah.
And to be fair, this survey, this was about 10 years ago. They did this little psychology trick. And in the intervening 10 years, the vast majority of people have come to accept global warming as a reality. And so even if you put them in a cold room, 70 to 80% of people will now still say, okay, yes, there is global warming. So
it's just very literal minded.
Yeah. So there is hope, and people love the wilderness. They love the outdoors. And that's why, when they have so many shows on now, like on the Discovery Channel, that are based in Alaska and based in the far north, because that's part of our consciousness. And unfortunately, there's a program on there that I want to take a minute to rail against because, this is my show, so I can talk about other shows I don't like.
Darn straight.
And that is this show on Discovery Channel called Gold Rush. And Gold Rush is a program about all these people who are up there. Mostly it's about people who have really heavy machinery, heavy equipment, and they're just tearing the Alaskan countryside apart as fast as they can to try to get little nuggets of gold. And whenever I watch that show, I can't help but think, I think that mountain that they just tore down, I think that was actually worth more than the 1.5 pounds of gold that they have at the end of the show.
Probably that equipment that they're using is worth more than they're ever going to get. I think they're sort of along the lines of gamblers or taxi drivers. I was a taxi driver for a while. Where the people outside, waiting outside the casino in their cars, are about on the level with the guys inside in terms of. But some nights I make a great score, but most of the time you don't. So
right, exactly. And that's,
most of the time you don't get that trip to the airport.
The gold rush miners and the gold miners, the prospectors. That's how they've been since the beginning, since the original gold rush back in California in the 1800s. And yes, the vast majority of people who go off on these gold rush things fail, and the vast majority of the time they fail. But then there's always the lucky strike, the one person who finds 1.5 pounds of gold, and that keeps everybody else going.
Everybody else ends up working in the cannery if they're lucky with the in Alaska.
Well, and what's happening up there is, of course, following what happened to California in the 1800s when they had their gold rush. And one of the things that happened up there in California was that the easy pickings, the gold that was right up on top and right there in the stream beds, you could just take your pan and get a gold nugget and you've made your fortune for the year. That all got used up very quickly. And so what they came up with was this process, this thing called hydraulic mining. And this was all happening in the 1800s. And hydraulic mining is basically you just take a high pressure hose and you blast the ground apart. You can blast mountains. In fact, literally they did this. They would start at the top of a mountain and blast the whole thing down into rubble. And the water would blast it into these sluices, and the sluices would go over screens of various sizes, and they would sift it out, and they would pluck out the little gold bits. And then the rest of the mountain, they would dump into the streams and the rivers. And the reason I'm bringing this one up is because that led to one of the very first ecologically based legal decisions in the country, in the world, really. Because what was happening is all this waste was getting dumped into these streams and rivers and clogging them up. And they were flooding, and they would flow downstream. They would flood farmers' fields. They would flood cities. They would flood towns. They would flood entire regions, because up at the top of the stream, these miners were doing this hydraulic mining and blasting the mountains into rubble.
That's what happens when you're just like, oh, we'll just nudge this river aside a few feet.
Right. So they took them, the people who lived downstream from these hydraulic mining things, took them to court. And there was a huge court battle, and they had like 2,000 people testifying during this years-long hearing. And finally, on January 7th, 1884, Judge Sawyer declared, okay, it's the end of hydraulic mining. He banned it. And the way he banned it is he didn't ban hydraulic mining directly, but he said you can't dump your tailings into any kind of river or stream, because that affects the property rights of the people who live downstream from the mining. And once he did that, then hydraulic mining became uneconomical, because really tearing up an entire mountain to get a couple pounds of gold is insane on the surface of it. And once they had to clean up their own mess and not destroy things in the process, they were just like, oh, we're out of here. So on that date in 1884 was one of the very first court decisions that established an ecological principle. It was way back before we had the science of ecology, at the very just dim beginnings of understanding the environment, how environment affected people. And it's a point of hope, because they went to court and shut down an industry. And unfortunately, as in so many ways, it seems that the Trump administration is kind of bringing us back to the old days, because now on many of these issues, environmental issues that we talk about, the courts are becoming the last resort, the last line of defense. And that's why today we're very happy to have with us one of the battlers in these court battles from one of the organizations that's fighting, I think, as many or more of these court battles as any other organization I know of, and that's the Center for Biological Diversity. So we have Ryan Shannon on the line, and he actually called in early, so he's been waiting patiently on hold. Ryan, are you there?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We can.
We can hear you just
Great.
fine.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. So, Ryan, could you just tell us, first of all, what your actual position is in the Center for Biological Diversity?
Yeah, of course. I am a staff attorney in our Endangered Species program, and I was brought on in early 2017 to defend the Endangered Species Act and imperiled species from the Trump administration's attacks on the ESA and endangered and threatened species.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us. And that's what I wanted to start with talking to you about, is Trump's attack on the Endangered Species Act. I think people hear a little bit here and there about it, but they don't really understand just how egregious these plans of Trump's are, and just how much that's going to damage the wildlife of our nation if he gets his way. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I think his attacks kind of come in two different types. On the one hand, we've seen the Trump administration propose the most significant rollbacks to the regulations implementing the Endangered Species Act that we've ever seen earlier this summer. There's three different regulations, three different regulatory rollbacks that they promulgated that we're now fighting in court. I won't go into each one in too much detail, but I'll kind of give you all the lowlights. The first one is they removed what was called the blanket 4D rule. Back in 1975, shortly after the Endangered Species Act was passed, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which implements the Endangered Species Act for terrestrial animals, issued a rule saying that any species listed as a threatened species, which are species that are likely to become endangered species in the foreseeable future, will presumptively receive all of the protections given to endangered species. The main one being, I think, the one that everyone kind of thinks about when they think about the Endangered Species Act, which is the protection from take. This basically forbids anyone from killing, harming, harassing endangered species, and through this regulation, threatened species. And the Fish and Wildlife Service always had the ability to issue a species-specific 4D rule. A 4D rule is named for the section of the Endangered Species Act, which gives them the authority to do this, to issue a rule that allowed certain exemptions to the take prohibition for threatened species. And they exercised that over the years here and there, but overall, most threatened species enjoyed protection from the blanket 4D rule.
Well, I think the fundamental thinking there seems pretty sound. I mean, if what the purpose of the law is to protect endangered species, and you see a species on its way to becoming endangered, why wait? Why wait till it's really difficult till the last minute where there's just a few left? I mean, so that regulation, that interpretation of the regulation seems pretty common sense to me.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Congress was thinking when they put 4D into the Endangered Species Act. They wanted the Fish and Wildlife Service to have the authority to take action to protect threatened species before they became endangered. Because often, like you said, by the time that they're endangered, it's a question of life support. And if you can catch them earlier on, the likelihood that you're going to be able to actually recover the species is higher. It may take less time, and honestly, it may take less money as well.
So we could actually help the animals more, help the endangered species more, for less money. So
it's a bit like
it's
cancer.
A radical idea.
You don't really want to wait to start your chemo until you're actually in the terminal phase of cancer.
Right. I will say that the Endangered Species Act, even with endangered species, has been incredibly successful. Of all the species that have been listed under it since its inception, it has a 99% success rate in keeping those species from going extinct.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so the people that say government can't do anything, well, the government has actually done something here, something good.
Yippers.
And I would point out with those people, you often hear the cliche that if I was a doctor and only 1% of my patients were discharged from the hospital, they'd revoke my license. I mean, it's a false analogy, and I don't think it actually looks at the facts on the ground. Even the service itself, the Fish and Wildlife Service itself, promulgates recovery plans for endangered and threatened species. And in those recovery plans, they'll give a timeline for when they actually think the species may be recovered. And under their own timelines, most species shouldn't be at the point of recovery until 40 or 50 years down the line. So we just simply haven't had enough time to do the work necessary to recover the species that are listed on the Endangered Species Act to date. And if we actually had the time, the funding, and the willpower to really provide the resources needed to recover those species, we'd see a lot more of those species being delisted under the Act because they'd have actually recovered.
Yeah, nice. Which, of course, is the goal. But
yeah, of course. I mean, we'd all love for there to be no species on the Endangered Species Act list.
Yeah.
That would be,
I would think
ideal.
that also maybe some people with severe disabilities would argue that still in the ICU is better than dead.
You're probably right.
Yeah. Okay, so that's attack number one is getting rid of these.
That's attack number one, so they'll no longer enjoy that presumptive protection. They're also changing, there's several changes to the regulations that implement Section 4 of the Endangered Species Act. Section 4 is the gateway to protections under the Endangered Species Act. It's the mechanism by which species are listed as either endangered or threatened, and by which they have critical habitat designated and protected, have recovery plans developed. And there's numerous rollbacks under their Section 4 regulations. I think probably the most egregious is that they are now allowing the Fish and Wildlife Service to look at the economic impacts of listing a species as either endangered or threatened. And Congress was very clear back in 1982 when it amended the Endangered Species Act that listing decisions about whether or not a species is endangered or threatened are to be based solely on the best available science, and economics are to play no part. Now, of course, they're saying that, they'll only do the economic impact analysis and the decision itself will still be based on the best available science. But it kind of begs the question, why do an analysis that the statute explicitly forbids you from considering when listing a species? And the answer is because they want to inject politics and economics into what should be a purely scientific decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it sounds like it's making it more bureaucratic. I mean, it's and swampier. I mean, Trump's...
Yeah, and the shame is that, the ESA has very specific deadlines by which the service is supposed to act to list a species under the Endangered Species Act, and for the obvious reason that these species are in need of protection now, and any delay can be incredibly harmful because they just continue to slide towards extinction without the critical life-saving protections of the Endangered Species Act. And currently, the Fish and Wildlife Service faces a backlog of over 500 species that are awaiting protection. So any further delay as they're doing these economic impact analyses for listing is just going to add to that bureaucratic backlog, and they're going to become, fall farther and farther behind. So it's really pernicious.
All right. So that's attack number 2 is trying to put the economic benefit of a species against the existence of the species. So
yes, and I should say that they're also making it harder to designate to determine that species are threatened by trying to foreclose consideration of things like impacts from climate change. They are making it harder and less likely that critical habitat will be designated. And they're also making it easier to remove species from the Endangered Species Act list. But then attack number 3 is on the implementing regulations for Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. And what Section 7 does is it imposes an affirmative duty on all federal agencies to ensure that any actions that they undertake do not jeopardize endangered species or destroy or adversely modify their critical habitat. And the term action is incredibly broad. This isn't just naval exercises. It also includes things like issuing Clean Water Act permits and the like. So it really does encompass quite a broad range of activities. And again, there's numerous attacks that they're rollbacks that they're doing there, but probably the most pernicious one is they are making it so that the service will only find that an agency's action is adversely modifying a species' critical habitat if it affects critical habitat on the whole, as a whole. And critical habitat is areas that have been determined by the service to be essential for the species' survival and recovery. So what this does is set us up to be in a position where a lot of these species' critical habitat are going to die death by 1,000 cuts. Because if you look at the critical habitat designation, for instance, for the northern spotted owl, it's pretty large. And so the likelihood that you're going to find that, an individual timber sale of 50 acres or whatever it may be adversely modifies critical habitat as a whole is low. Because if you're comparing 50 acres against, 100,000 acres, well, it's a fraction of a percent. But those timber sales happen all the time. And so at the end of the year, you might actually be looking at 5,000 acres that have been impacted, 10,000 acres, whatever it may be. And it just sets you up to allow the agencies to ignore these small cuts until it's too late.
Yeah, and when you say death by 1,000 cuts, you really are talking about death of a species, which we as Americans have agreed, through the passage of this law, we don't want that to happen. We don't want that. To a great deal, the wildlife that lives in North America defines North America. I mean, grizzly bears, nowhere else do we have the grizzly bears the way we do here in North America. Bison, and it's not just the big fuzzy mammals, but it's also amphibians. It's all kinds of creatures that are all part of America, the way people found it when they came here. And I think none of us want, or almost none of us want to lose that. They don't want our country to become just, all dandelions and brown rats. And yeah. So.
Yeah. And I would say too that, not only did the Endangered Species Act enjoy overwhelming support when it was passed, it passed almost unanimously out of Congress and was signed by Richard Nixon, of all people. But it enjoys incredible public support today. People still care about endangered species, threatened species, and preserving, the sanctity of life, both here in the U.S. and abroad. And, the role of the Endangered Species Act right now is absolutely critical. We're living through a staggering wildlife extinction crisis that we've really never witnessed before. The United Nations earlier this year estimated that 1 million species worldwide face extinction within the coming decade. And then the International Union for the Conservation of Nature just this week came out with a report saying more than 1 in 4 species assessed by them are threatened with extinction.
Which is probably why they're going about it this sneaky, backhanded way, because people don't really want it to be McEagle burgers coming soon to a drive-thru near you. So they can't be that direct about it.
Yeah, I would actually say that the Endangered Species Act regulations is really one of the more overt ways that they're going after the Endangered Species Act and threatened species. I would say that the kind of silent more devious way that they're attacking endangered species is simply by not doing anything. The Trump administration has listed fewer species on the Endangered Species Act than any previous administration. They list on average 7 species a year. That's compared to the Clinton administration that issued about 65 species per year, and the Obama administration that listed about 45 species per year. And at the same time, they're actively working to remove species from the Endangered Species Act. Through FOIA requests, we actually found out that the Fish and Wildlife Service in the Southeast region, which actually has some of the greatest biodiversity in the United States, has what they're calling a wildly important goal to issue 30 deregulatory actions per year. So they're really striving hard to remove protections from endangered species at a time when we're in this extinction crisis.
And that number sounds kind of arbitrary. It doesn't sound like science-based. It's not like some study said, if we could afford to remove 30 a year. It sounds like some politician said, you will remove 30 a year.
Right.
Or, heads will roll. All right. Well, so how are we on attacks there? Have we pretty much covered them, or is there still one more that you want to tell us about?
I think the Endangered Species Act regulatory rollbacks and their failure to do enough to provide protections on the Endangered Species Act for the species that are awaiting protections, for the hundreds of species awaiting protections, are kind of the 2 main attacks on the Endangered Species Act. Obviously, under Bernhardt's Department of the Interior, the attacks are broad and wide, and there are more that we could talk about, but I think those are kind of the 2 main takeaways.
All right. Well, thank you for your organization's role in fighting those, in battling this in court, and let's hope that you win. Could you just real quickly just sort of give us a list of some of the other battles that Center for Biological Diversity is fighting? I mean, we don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but I just want to give people kind of a quick image of what you folks are doing.
Well, we're doing everything we can, and I would say I'm in the Endangered Species Program, and so I can't talk with too much authority about what other folks are doing in other programs, but I can kind of give you a couple of highlights. Overall, we've got about 179 lawsuits going against the Trump administration.
Wow.
And those range from work being done by our oceans program to protect critical habitat for southern resident killer whales and humpback whales, and their ongoing fight against plastic pollution in the ocean. We have a strong environmental health program that is fighting to ensure that endangered species and our environment are protected from dangerous pesticides, as the EPA has sought to allow their more and more usage of dangerous pesticides with fewer regulations governing them. We have a strong open government program that is working hard under the Freedom of Information Act to bring transparency to the actions of the Trump administration, and they're being fought every step of the way, especially by agencies like EPA. And then our Climate Change Institute is working hard both domestically and internationally to address the impacts of climate change by any and all means. And then we have a strong international program that works through CITES and the other international treaties to protect species internationally, like the vaquita, which is a critically endangered small porpoise in the Gulf of California. And we have a strong government affairs program that works hard with our allies in Congress to ensure that that the legislative attacks against the Endangered Species Act and our other critical environmental protection statutes are defeated.
Wow. All right. Well, wow. So that makes us...
I think I got them all.
Yeah, that makes us all the more grateful that you're able to take a little time out from these battles to talk with us today. I want to end on kind of an upbeat note. Have you had any victories lately that you can brag about or share with us?
Yeah, so, in the face of the Trump administration failing to provide species protections in a timely manner in the Endangered Species Act, recently we sent a notice of intent to sue them over 274 species awaiting protections, but earlier this year we filed suits over a smaller batch of species that also were awaiting protection under the Endangered Species Act, and we've had a couple of successes as a result of that lawsuit. We had both the Western Glacier stonefly and the meltwater Linnean stonefly protected as threatened species just last week, and we also had critical habitat designated for the Suwannee moccasin shell in the southeast. It's a freshwater mussel. There's a really kind of a crisis going on in the world of freshwater mussels. They're dying off at an incredible rate, and they're important indicators about the health of our freshwater ecosystems. Our oceans program also has been incredibly successful. They recently got the National Marine Fisheries Service to propose critical habitat for humpback whales, and have been successful in expanding critical habitat for southern resident killer whales.
All right. So there is hope. So we can win some of these battles, and the more the better. All right, Ryan, just one more. If people want to find out more about your organization and what you do, how would they go about doing that?
You can go to biologicaldiversity.org. You can become a member and sign up for our email list, and we have direct action campaigns that people can become involved with. And I would just check it all out at the website, which again is biologicaldiversity.org, or always you can just Google Center for Biological Diversity.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan, for coming on, and hopefully we can have you on again in the future.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having me.
All right. That was Ryan Shannon with the Center for Biological Diversity.
Seems to be very much the finger in the dike of disastrous
Right.
species extinction, mass extinction.
Yeah, I mean, what we should have is the legislation in place.
Yeah.
And the legislation enforced in such a way that it does the task that the legislation set forth.
Right.
And we should not be fighting, because essentially the Trump administration, as the executive branch of government, they're the enforcers of the law, and we should not have to fight with the enforcers of the law to have the law carried out. You know, if you're a lawful administration, you carry out the laws. I mean, it's pretty basic, pretty simple.
But yeah, we hired the guy for the position of henhouse keeper who said that he wanted the job because, quote, chickens are yummy, unquote.
Okay, well, so this takes us past the bottom of the hour, actually, and we are a little bit lax in doing our words from our sponsors, so we will go to them right now. One of our sponsors on For a Green Future is DeMare Consulting. DeMare Consulting is a computer consulting firm, and they will come to your home. They will help you with any sort of computer problem you're having, whether it's that your computer can't talk to your printer or your network keeps crashing. Maybe you need stuff backed up. Maybe you need some software installed. These are the sorts of things that DeMare Consulting can help you with. And DeMare Consulting, everyone at DeMare Consulting has a degree in computer science, so you know that they know what they're talking about. And they could do things like replace a bad power supply. Just give them a call or check out their website. If you give them a call, that's at 419-973-3000. That's 419-973-3000. You can call or text. And their website is demareconsulting.com. That's DEMARE, then the word consulting.com. So DeMare Consulting for all your computer needs.
And what do people do if they want to sponsor the show, Joe?
Oh, this very show, For a Green Future?
Indeedy, yes.
Well, if they are so moved, they could go to our website, which is Joe DeMare for a Green Future.org. That's JOEDEMAREFOR, greenfuture.org. And there's ways to send us emails there. And they can also go to Patreon. We are on Patreon. So you just go to patreon.com, Patreon, and then search for a Green Future, and you can become a monthly supporter. And monthly support starts at $1 a month, goes all the way up to $50 a month. And we will thank you profusely on air, as we do for our current sponsors. And we really could use the help. It may not seem like it, but this is expensive to put on and expensive to keep going. And we love doing it, and we're going to do it as long as we can. But we could definitely do it longer and better with your help and your sponsorship. So if you want, go to patreon.com. So then we have one more sponsor.
Okay.
And that is the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. The Wood County Parks protects 20 parks and nature preserves around Wood County, and those are open from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's two ways to get a hold of Wood County Parks. Three, actually. One is by phone, 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. Or you can go to their website, which is wcparks.org. Or you can download their app, which is really cool and which I have on my phone. You just go to the App Store and search for WC Parks. And on that app, you can see what kind of events are coming up. I know this is going to air afterwards, but they're having, for example, they're going to watch the Geminid meteor shower this coming Friday. That's the sort of thing that, you're looking for something to do, some excuse to get outside and enjoy nature. Well, they're all about giving you that excuse. So check out the Wood County Parks and learn to love and respect nature. Okay, so now we are going on to the part of the show where we talk a little bit about stuff that's in the news, environmental things in the news. And again, this is a slightly unusual show because I want to spend some time on one particular news article. Yes, I have a newspaper in front of me.
Sound effects.
Yes. This past Sunday, December 8th, as Rebecca and I were preparing and giving our fantastic show that we had last Sunday, The Blade put out a story by Jim Provence, and the title is 6 Ohio Court Justices Received Funds from Firm. First Energy Gave to Campaigns.
Funny coincidence.
Yeah.
And their legislation, which they sponsor and pay money to senators for, is going extremely well.
Yeah. And basically what this is another point in the House Bill 6 controversy. And it's kind of amazing, how many aspects of Ohio culture and Ohio society this House Bill 6 controversy has touched. I mean, it looked at the beginning just like this simple kind of quid pro quo kind of thing where, the First Energy just asks for money and they'd get it. But such a fight has been put up, so much struggle has come from so many different parts of the Ohio society, all opposed to this terrible bill, which eliminates our energy efficiency programs and it eliminates funding for wind and solar, and it gives funds to nuclear and coal. And, this fight has actually spilled over now into the Ohio Supreme Court because the company that was hired to gather the petition signatures that would have put it on the ballot as a referendum to overturn it is saying that the state Secretary of State ran out the clock a significant amount of the petitioning time, because the law says that petitioners have 90 days from the time a law passes in order to gather the petition signatures to create a referendum. Well, the Secretary of State used up about almost 50 of those 90 days, or 38, used up 38 of those 90 days, which at the rate they were gathering signatures, that was more than enough to block the success. In other words, if they had those 38 days at the rate they were gathering, they probably would have made the deadline and they would have had enough signatures. But so they've gone to court to argue that the law says 90 days to gather. That means 90 days to gather. That doesn't mean 90 days minus whatever time the Secretary of State decides to, play solitaire or, whatever he was doing while he was sitting.
Take long coffee breaks, something.
Yeah.
Write love letters to First Energy. We don't know.
That could be. That might be what he was doing. And so it turns out, and the point of this article is that almost all the Ohio State Supreme Court justices, almost all of them, in fact, all of them except one, have received campaign contributions from First Energy.
Anyway.
Yeah. I mean...
No wonder. Just no wonder.
Yeah, we're talking, let's see. And there's only 2 Democrats on the state Supreme Court. One of them received a donation. Melody Stewart, she received $1,000. And then Michael Donnelly is the other one. He is the only one. Michael Donnelly is the only state Supreme Court justice who did not receive any funding.
Good for
First
him.
Energy. Good for him. And in my opinion, he's the only Supreme Court justice that should actually hear this case and make a decision on it. Now, one of the justices has already recused themselves, has already said, I'm biased, or there's an appearance of bias, or, whatever. Actually, he doesn't have to justify it at all. Doesn't have to give his reasoning. He's just recused himself. And I say...
Good for him.
Good for him, exactly. That was a moral thing to do. But the remaining justices, we have Maureen O'Connor got $6,000. Melody Stewart, as I said, got $1,000. Patrick Fisher got $13,400. Sharon Kennedy got $13,000. Judith French got $6,700. And Patrick DeWine got $2,700 from First Energy. So the state of the appeal right now is that the justices have not said whether they're even going to hear the case or not. It was originally appealed in federal court. Federal court said, no, this is a state question. Here, state Supreme Court, here's 5 questions for you. Answer these questions and respond to this lawsuit, because we, the federal government, we're not going to get involved in an Ohio thing. The thing is that request from the federal government has no force behind it. They can't force the state Supreme Court to listen, to hear it. And politically, probably the easiest things for these justices is just to not do anything, to just sit on it forever and let it sort of peter out. At least that's what they're hoping it'll do. But the thing is, this is a bill, this is a controversy which refuses to just go away. People are not letting this one go. I mean, it's just so blatant and so lopsided a decision that people are actually hanging on to it. And, as evidenced by this article in the Blade last Sunday. And also included in that article is a handy table of local legislators who also received donations from this, from First Energy prior to this House Bill 6 getting pushed through. And they have a nice little list here, a nice little table. Teresa Gavarone, my representative from Bowling Green, she got $1,000. She voted yes. Senator Robert McCauley of Napoleon, he got $5,000, but he actually voted no on it, which is interesting. Some Republicans, a lot of Republicans...
We'll see how he does next campaign season.
Well, a lot of Republicans actually oppose it on philosophical grounds, that we should not be bailing out private companies,
which is supposed to be what they're all about.
Yeah.
Let the free market take its course and don't rely on the government. Well, let's see that.
Matt Huffman of Lima got $8,500. He voted yes. David Burke of Marysville got $1,000. He voted yes. Jim Hoops of Napoleon, $2,000, voted yes. Mike Sheehy of Oregon, $1,500. He voted yes. Paula Hicks Hudson is interesting because she got $1,500 and she voted for it in the initial round of voting, but then she didn't vote at all in the final round of voting.
Yeah, right.
Except that it only passed by 1 vote in the final round of voting.
Ooh.
So if she had voted no, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It would not have passed, and yeah. So anyway, Bill Reineke Tiffin, $1,000, voted yes. Derek Marin of Monclova, $500, voted yes. He's kind of a cheap date there, Derek Marin. Bob Cupp, Lima, $2,350, voted yes. John Cross, $12,700, voted yes. So now, of course, the official story is from legislators and from Supreme Court justices that donations do not affect decisions, that what they make their decisions independent of any money that people give them or any money that any company gives them. And so we have to take that statement into account. But we also have to wonder why First Energy would make donations if they don't have any influence on decisions. But
yeah, it seems like bad business. That could go to their shareholders.
Well, but we can't draw conclusions publicly on the air.
No.
So we have to be very careful about that. We are not saying...
We'll leave that to you as logical people, listeners.
We're not saying that they voted the way they did because of the money. We're just saying they got money and they voted the way they did. All right. So that actually took up more time than I thought it would. There was a few other things I wanted to talk about. One really quick. I just want to mention this quickly. Over in England, they've gone into wind in a big way, in a way Ohio hasn't. And what they are finding is that at night, there's so much wind that they are actually paying people with electric vehicles to charge their cars at night.
Wow.
Yeah. Nuclear promised to be too cheap to meter. Wind is turning out to be so cheap that they will pay you to take the electricity.
Wow.
Yeah. And the idea is that instead of a big bank of batteries acting as backup power, they'll use everybody's cars as that bank of batteries, their electric vehicles as that bank of batteries for backup power, which is great. I mean, they were showing pictures on Twitter. People were showing their electric meters with positive numbers. You're getting this much money back because you charged your car.
That would rock.
So,
I hope that goes on to be one of those things they have like universal free healthcare, where once you get it, you're like, no, we're not giving that up. Are you crazy?
Yeah. So see, we could do that.
Yeah.
We could be that country. We have the technology to have meters smart enough, and
lots more wind, big place,
we've
lots
got
of
more
wind.
wind. We've got,
especially Northwest Ohio.
like, we've got more people that want to have electric cars, and you can program your car for when to charge, so you just tell it charge between 3 and 5 a.m., the low demand time, and you get paid for charging your car at that hour.
Wow. That would be super cool.
Could be us with a different philosophy of governance, with a different sort of administration, and with, technologically, there's nothing stopping us. The only block is political. So, but we know we're going to get through all these blocks. And how do we know this, Rebecca?
Oh my gosh, did you get another letter from the future?
I did. I got a letter from the year 2299.
Wow.
From my great-great-granddaughter. And here is this week's letter. Dear GGG, great-great-grandpa, I am on Mars, ! Well, specifically, I am in the quarantine capsule in the main Martian settlement, Goodall. It's funny, our dirigible spaceship was over a mile long, so the whole space voyage I felt like I had tons of room to walk and explore. Now that we've landed on a planet, we're stuck in an inflatable building barely larger than a soccer field. And we have to stay here for 2 weeks to make sure we're not carrying any diseases into the colony, and to balance our personal biomes with that of the Mars colony. Many people of your time don't know that each of us carries a personal zoo of thousands of different kinds of microscopic organisms, fungi, bacteria, mycoplasms, viruses, etc. When a group of humans gets isolated, like the Mars colonists, their personal biota shifts away from the rest of humanity. One thing we're doing during these 2 weeks is taking daily baths and showers with water that's been cultured with the right kind of microorganisms for the Mars colony. Otherwise, one of us could cause the entire colony to get sick. Looking out the windows at the Martian landscape is incredible. It looks like we could just stroll out on the surface, but with an atmospheric pressure of just 1% of Earth's without a spacesuit, it's deadly. Sam has already made the trip to meet me, and we spent some time talking with only a quarantine window separating us. One of the coolest things is being able to broad jump 40 feet. There's an exercise field in the quarantine dome, and we're all encouraged to exercise for many hours every day. So far, I love Mars. Love you too, GGG, Marie I.
Must be a great place for people with arthritis. I haven't been able to jump up and down on solid ground since I was 25 years old.
Yeah.
I need to go to Mars. I could jump up and down a lot.
You could probably jump 10 feet in the air without too much trouble. And an interesting slip by Marie I there. She said that atmospheric pressure is 1% of Earth. Right now, the atmospheric pressure on Mars is 0.5% of Earth.
Ooh.
So I think they may be doing some terraforming there in the year 2299. They might be trying to build that atmosphere up to a point where it can protect people from the incoming solar radiation that
there you go.
Just blasts the surface right now and keeps anything from living there. So, all right. Well, we are in the last few minutes of For a Green Future. And this, again, is a special pre-recorded episode. But, think if you heard anything on this episode or in any previous episodes that kind of touched a nerve or made you think a little bit, and you kind of want to talk about it, work it out, we're always happy to do that on our live shows. And so, write that question down. And so when Becca and I are back on the December 22nd with a live show, please call up at 866-240-1065 and give us talk with us. We'll have a little chat. So
we're here to try and keep your metaphorical golf course from becoming all sand trap and water hazard.
Right. So we have basically we've run through all the pre-recorded stuff, pre-planned stuff. We got about a minute and a half to fill here, Becca. Anything that struck you about our guest or about anything else that we've been talking about lately?
What? Bees are rebounding, I hear.
Oh, rebounding.
Is that really true? Yeah. Somebody told me that.
I hadn't heard they were rebounding. I know that people are doing things like making a point to plant flowers that bees can refuel with in their neighborhoods. And, people are starting to take action to protect the bees and rebound them. I haven't heard that they're rebounding yet. That would be cool.
If they're even just declining at less of a severe rate, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, we had an interesting experience in Bowling Green this past year, and that was, if you'll recall, the spring, there was so much rain that the farmers could not get into their fields to plant. And that also meant that they could not get into their fields to spray. And one thing about Bowling Green, living there, is that there aren't very many bugs.
Right, I imagine not.
Yeah, we could leave our screen doors open. Maybe 1 or 2 flies will fly in. But I remember when I was a kid, you left your screen door open in the spring or summer, and you'd get hundreds of bugs trying to get in there and move in with you. Well, what happened, we had sort of a natural experiment this year because there was no spraying up through most of June. Wow. And guess what? We had bugs again.
Makes sense.
There were all kinds of, we had to keep the screen doors closed, mosquitoes and flies and bees. And in fact, we had ground bees in our yard. We had a nest of ground bees that I actually got stung, which is like, kind of like, oh yeah, okay, I'm glad you're here, but you have to sting me. So,
yeah, mixed feelings.
Yeah, so
remember, it's all for the environment. When you get stung by the ground bees.
That's what I tell myself when I start pulling stingers out of my body. Right, they're good for the environment. Good for the environment. So I marked the bee's nest with flags. I had some of those little lawn flags so that I wouldn't run them over with a lawnmower or get close enough to get stung again. And they were going at it, and they were all kinds of healthy right up through maybe the end of June, start of July. And right about the time that the farmer started spraying again, the bugs went away again. We noticed in our now this is an unscientific study. This is just us in our yard looking at
anecdotal evidence, if you will.
This is what you call anecdotal evidence that may be unrelated. A good scientist wouldn't take this as proof of anything, but it happened. We had tons of insects when they weren't spraying. They started spraying again. All the insects went away, and our little ground bee nest, where they had that little guard bee that they put the one bee at the entrance, the toughest looking bee, basically the biggest.
Okay. Didn't know that.
Yeah, just sort of hovers there. And if anything comes by, he's like, buzz. And that all went away. And it just, it's possible they got attacked by wasps or something and eaten. But it's also possible there's something going on here with too many pesticides. And over again, that's what we find is the determining factor. It's affecting the bird populations. It's affecting the bee populations. We've got to get off pesticides. We've got to shift to an organic farming culture as the norm, and we'll all be better off if we do that.
And also that normal people will be able to afford organic food, which is just horribly expensive.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I hear our theme music, and thanks for sticking with us through this pre-recorded show. Rebecca and I will be back again on the 22nd with a live show. This is Joe DeMare
and Rebecca Wood
signing off.